Hi, everyone. My name is Masha Vernik, and I'll be presenting today about my thesis in international relations, agroecology on Kichwa terms. And you can read the rest of the subtitle. So I did my field research in this small town in Ecuador called Santa Rita, and it is on the border between the mountains and the Andes and the rainforest in tropical Ecuador. And you can see a picture of the small town here. It has about 700 people in it, and it's Kichwa, which is one of the most prominent indigenous groups in the area. So in Santa Rita, they use these things, these farm plots called chakras, in order to grow their food. So chakras are traditionally subsistence farm plots that have high levels of biodiversity because they have hundreds of different plant species for food, for medicine, and it's closely related to Kichwa identity, and it also closely interrelated with notions around gender and status and identity in general. So in recent years, people have begun to grow cacao in these chakras in order to make money. And cacao has taken a role in the chakra, especially as a result, not solely as a result, but alongside institutions like NGOs and state non-governmental organizations and state ministries who are advancing cacao in the chakra as a way to make money in a sustainable way. So to meet their own sustainable development goals. So my thesis is basically asking how the chakra's meanings shift as cacao gets incorporated into it and as the chakra itself gets incorporated into these institutional goals of sustainable development. And the reason this is important is that this is actually, according to some, a broader trend that's happening at the global level, where an agroecology that originates with indigenous groups or social movements or peasant movements gets co-opted by institutions like the Food and Agriculture Organization or state governments. And co-optation essentially means that they take the chakra and they change its meanings in order to align with their own goals. So this is really a question about definitional agency. Who has the power to define the chakra and therefore to determine what it is? So my argument when analyzing to what extent and in what ways this process of co-optation is happening in Santa Rita, my argument is two-pronged. So first of all, it's an argument about coexistence. I actually believe that the chakra as defined by institutions and the chakra as defined by indigenous Kichwa people, they're different definitions and they coexist with each other. And that's because of a process called mutual peripherality. I'll explain in the next slide. And then my second argument is one about negotiation. So I argue that when institutions associate the chakra with some Kichwa meanings, when they take into account what the chakra means for indigenous people, that actually gives the people of Santa Rita and the indigenous leaders leverage to align institutional meanings further. So it's about power dynamics, and it's about how the chakra's definition gets negotiated. And this is basically an argument about what conditions allow for greater indigenous agency in defining the chakra. So my theoretical framework, so I developed this theoretical framework to explain the processes that are happening here. And essentially the reason that two different definitions can coexist with each other is because for Kichwa people, the chakra is central to understanding the relationship between the chakra and cacao cacao is peripheral. So what's more important is being able to subsist and make food, and cacao, while it makes money, that's not really central to the chakra. Whereas for institutions, when they have all these sustainable development goals, cacao is central to achieving those goals because that's the thing that makes money, and the chakra is peripheral because that's what allows the income generation to be made in a sustainable way. My methodology, I lived in Santa Rita for 2 months last summer in June and July. I conducted 8 qualitative interviews, semi-structured interviews with institutions and 17 with farmers. And then I had 21 quantitative surveys collecting data about the chakra's agrobiodiversity, which just means the different plants that are grown in the chakra. So I'm going to talk through the 3 domains that I looked at, which are knowledge, markets, and institutions, and look at how the different definitions exist alongside each other and negotiate with each other. So in the knowledge domain, which is essentially determines what, because knowledge determines what the chakra is, the knowledge about different plants inside of the chakra, it's important to look at how they, what's happening inside of this domain. So these institutions who operate in Santa Rita bring in a lot of technical knowledge to Santa Rita, and they're telling people how to, in this case, in this picture, graft cacao trees, how to graft healthy cacao trees onto sick ones, because there are a lot of fungus plagues that are plaguing the region. And when they have these technical workshops, they have a definition of the chakra, which is that it's adaptable to incoming knowledge alongside being deeply rooted in ancestral knowledge. But then as they have these technical workshops, they focus mostly on cacao. And they don't really talk so much about the agroecological context that they're in. So they still have this idea about the cacao being central and the chakra being peripheral throughout this knowledge spreading. But then on the Kichwa side of things, it's a little different. Once again, we see that in the inverse, we see that the chakra is central and cacao is peripheral. And the way that I know that is that life kind of seems to go on as normal in terms of using the chakra as a way of subsistence. People still have hundreds of different kinds of plants inside one farm plot, and this graph kind of proves that, or is evidence for it, at least. So on the y-axis, we have the number of different plant species, and on the x-axis, we have the number of cacao trees per hectare. And there are 17 samples from chakras in Santa Rita. And as you can see, there isn't really a strong correlation between increased cacao intensification and decreased biodiversity, which is what you would expect if it was sort of becoming like a monocrop or a monoculture. So the way that these two definitions are negotiating with each other is that because the institutions listen or are willing to appreciate the significance of ancestral knowledge in the chakra, they're also willing to listen. So that's what's happening here. This woman, Norma, is explaining some of these plants that she collected from the rainforest called Achakaspi, and a development representative from GIZ, which is the German association, is listening to her. And I argue that that's in part because GIZ has this definition of the chakra that is associated with Kichwa knowledge. So in effect, that gives Kichwa leaders the leverage to push and have space to explain all of the knowledge that they know. So within the market domain, we have two principal actors who are buying cacao in Santa Rita, and that is Vernik, which is a Kichwa chocolate association, and Pacari, which is a private company, an Ecuadorian private company. And they have different goals for cacao, and for that reason, different roles that the chakra plays within cacao production, and vice versa. So for Vernik, because they're a Kichwa association, their primary goals and their aim is to support indigenous production systems, and they kind of see their role Vernik's role is to mediate the relationship between the chakra and cacao, or more broadly between tradition and ancestral knowledge and modernity. And because of this goal for cacao and chakra production, they understand the role of the chakra as essentially preserving Kichwa identity, and they have this definition of the chakra that is in line with ancestral ideas. For Pacari, however, their goal is to make money because they're a company, and also to empower themselves nationally. They want to show that Ecuador is capable of producing high-quality cacao, and because all of the cacao that's produced in Santa Rita is fine aroma, very high quality. And because of that, the role that they have defined for cacao, for the chakra, is one of cacao production, essentially. To Pacari, the chakra allows for this production of fine aroma cacao, and while it's great that it is done in a sustainable way, that's not really their main goal. So once again, we see that to Pacari, the chakra is peripheral to cacao. And then what that does to negotiation is that in terms of how these different ideas of the relationship between the chakra and cacao interact, is that essentially Pacari has kind of sidelined Vernik. and they have become the principal buyer of cacao in Santa Rita as a result of a number of factors, including the fact that they just buy at higher prices, and they have invested a lot into a bunch of development projects in the community. But then I think a reason that they were allowed to do this within Pacari's own internal logic is that to them, the chakra wasn't really connected to Kichwa identity. It was depoliticized. So that means that they don't have to listen to Kichwa actors when they're defining their own production system. And that in essence has decreased Wiñak's agency to define the relationship between the chakra and cacao. So the final domain that I'm looking at is that of tourism. In Santa Rita, there is a community tourism center that focuses on cacao, and the community has taken on this identity of el pueblo del cacao y chocolate, or the village of cacao and chocolate. And in this community tourism center, which was largely funded by Pacari among a few other institutions, they take tourists. In this case, these are tourists. These are actually members of the German Parliament who were visiting on the first day that I came, because GIZ, the German Development Association, is funded by Germany. So, so that was pretty cool. And so what he's doing, this is actually my host father, the man who's pointing to some of the crops inside of a chakra. He's giving them a tour of the chakra. But what happens is that because the entire community tourism center is focused on cacao, and it has this end goal of the user understanding how cacao, where their chocolate comes from, in his explanation, cacao takes a front seat, and the rest is peripheral to it. And he has to explain the chakra within, primarily within the role that it plays with cacao. So I think the reason that this whole community tourism center is more focused on cacao than on the chakras is because it's an institutional initiative. That's not the case for all tourism. I don't think that's inherent in community tourism, but in this community, it is. It was kind of originated in alignment with Buen Vivir, or this broader ideas of sustainable development in Ecuador, funded by a lot of ministries and largely by Pacari as well, to show their customers where their chocolate comes from. So, in conclusion, I think that my thesis has shown that plural definitions can coexist, which is kind of a strong argument for the maintenance of indigenous identity in the face of modernity, that people in indigenous communities are able to, basically act within a capitalist context and to be integrated into this capitalist society, but still maintain their own identity. But it's really key to make sure that as this negotiation happens, there is stronger indigenous agency within the negotiation. And I think that in order for that to happen, for there to be stronger indigenous agency over the interaction, there must be institutional definitions that take into account at least some Kichwa meanings for the chakra. Thank you. Yes, Josh.
First of all, well done. This is such a cool project, and I really like kind of the frameworks you set up. I had a question kind of about whether or not you reported on it in your thesis. How did, even your host family or people you talked to feel about these things if you had these discussions? Was there a sense that there was kind of a loss of indigenous agency or not? Or?
I would say that for a lot of them, they were the people that I had the most contact with were the people in the community who were engaging the most in these development projects, and that was a concentrated group of people. Of the 700 people in the community, I would say about 30 or so were the ones who were really, really engaged in growing cacao along these technical guidelines. So the people that I spoke with had this entrepreneurial spirit. And I think for them, they saw it as super possible to coexist. And they didn't see it as modernity taking or capitalism taking over their own identity. But I think if I went back, I would try to speak to more people in the community, which is kind of hard because I had to get the approval of the president to conduct interviews. So yeah, my sample was, I guess, in that concentrated group of privileged producers in a way, and I would speak to more people if I could. Yeah, Daniel?
What is the political hierarchy of these indigenous groups, and how do decisions get made on how you are getting involved, how the community is getting involved in the market, and how products are sold and that?
Yeah. So within the community, it's mostly a group of people. It's like one e-board in terms that we understand. It's about 5 people, 5 to 6 people who make the central decisions, and then there are broader groups. They have like twice a year, they'll have broader assemblies with the entire community. But there is an indigenous hierarchy beyond the community as well. And Santa Rita actually isn't as participative in those coalitions of indigenous groups as some other communities are. And I think that might have to do with their really, really high level of involvement with these institutions like PCARI and GIZ and the state ministries. Yeah. Yeah.